Let the meltdown begin. MMA Meltdown on the Fight Network. I am Gabriel Morency. Let's do this thing, dual threat style this evening, as we've got Kuhn and Joey Oddessa stepping up and in. It might be a slow week as far as the UFC is concerned, but we got a monster card in Brazil next week. We've got Bellator 129 this week from Iowa, and it's not a star-laden card from Iowa, but there should be some good throwdowns, man. Anytime that Josh Neer and Paul Bradley are getting into a cage, you know there's going to be some fireworks. Both these fighters will come to fight. We'll crunch some numbers with Joey Oddessa, and we'll take a look ahead to the UFC in Brazil next week. One of our favorite guests and a man who wrote a great book right now. And for all you winners out there, the books are on the way. They're being sent out. The book is Fightnomics. It's a must-read for you diehard MMA fans, for you you coaches out there, trainers, as well as MMA bettors. Let's bring in Kuhn, Fightnomics.com. Reed, it's always a pleasure, my man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for the fight season to pick back up again.
Yeah, I tell you what, the UFC does a lot of things right. Yet at the same point in time, I have to wonder about their scheduling process here. You got multiple cards going on. You got UFC doubleheaders going on. You got cards in China going on at 4 in the morning. You've got cards at 10 in the morning. You got cards in Halifax at 1:45 local time in the morning. You've got all these cards that happened recently, all at strange times on the same days, and now we go 3 weeks without anything. I know people often complain, oh, it's oversaturated, there's too many events, and I sort of get that, even though it's never too much for me. I enjoy it. If it was on every night, I would watch it every night, but with that being stated, I don't understand how you can have a 3-week gap in between cards like this.
Well, at the same time, it also builds a little bit more anticipation for a big pay-per-view card, and also they're trying to balance optimizing their ticket sales for local events versus the televised events and drawing in that viewership. So they're running their business as well as they can. I do sometimes wonder about the strategy and some of the big decisions like that, but the bottom line is we've now had a couple weeks off, and that just makes UFC 179 a little bit more interesting because I've had some time to get ready for it.
No, that's true. That's true. The anticipation builds. And also, we should clarify, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, Reed. For all we know, the executives over at Fox Sports and Fox Sports 1 said, we don't need anything for these couple of weeks. We'd prefer if you gave us a bunch of hours of programming then as opposed to now, per se. But so we do have a big card in Brazil next week, and a lot of people believe that if Aldo didn't grab the fence, that fight would have ended differently because Mendes would have gotten the takedown in the first fight before eventually he got kneed to the face and got knocked out. Are you amongst those people that believe that fight would have ended differently if Aldo didn't get away with the fence grab?
Well, I don't know if it was the fence grab. I think it had more to do with Chad Mendes' fight plan going in. He was 0 for 7 on takedowns in that first round alone. He was really telegraphing it. And pursuing someone like Jose Aldo, who's dangerous with all kinds of strikes, you just can't be throwing your head forward shooting for takedowns like that. So it's no surprise that it was a knee that actually ended up catching him. So I think that the difference in this fight is really where Chad Mendes has brought his game since then. We've seen guys at Alpha Male change their game, turn from wrestlers into strikers. But one of the effects of improving your striking is that you don't have to telegraph your takedowns the way you used to, the way guys like Chad Mendes had to rely on their wrestling to grind out decisions. He's now turned into a very powerful knockout artist, and I think that will be the big difference. It's hard to say when there's a questionable move or cheating. And listen, we just had the Yoel Romero controversy. It's hard to say what should happen, but with a move like that, grabbing the fence, it would have only been a matter of time. Chad Mendes would have been diving in for more takedowns, and maybe he would have been knocked out in the second round had that not happened. So I'm more interested to see where Chad Mendes' game has come since then.
Yeah, and you look at the odds for this fight, and Aldo's a minus 240, minus 250 favorite. I believe it was about double that the first time around. You mentioned Alpha Male's been on the tear. You got TJ Dillashaw beats one of Aldo's teammates and best friends in Renan Barão. I think people sort of see it as a package deal, but I think Aldo and Barão are two different people, and I think Aldo is a little tougher mentally than Barao is, and we've seen Barao with the weight cut issues as of late. But it's funny. People are sort of just slotted Aldo in for a loss here. A lot of people like Mendes in this fight. I'm not one of them. I think Aldo has passed every test. I think there's a huge difference as well. If this fight was in Los Angeles like it was supposed to be, Reed, as opposed to Brazil, I think it's a monster difference. How much do you put into that?
Well, the home cage advantage is some factor. The Brazilians definitely see the biggest effect in that. I talk about that in the book. And their crowd is ferocious. So when it comes to a decision, having that kind of crowd noise behind you, announcing every strike that lands and booing whenever your fighter gets on his back, that can't help. I mean, that really is the mechanism for a home field advantage in all of sports. It's been studied elsewhere in soccer and all over the place. So that can be an effect, and Brazil is certainly the place where it should happen. But you're also talking about a very experienced wrestler who has been in top control a lot. Chad Mendes, if he gets top control, he can win some rounds. So in the striking exchanges, I still give some advantage to Aldo. He's got a reach advantage. He's very precise. He's been doing this a long time against the top-level guys. Mendes definitely has power, and we've seen it recently, but we just haven't seen it against an opponent of this caliber. So there are still reasons to think that Aldo should be the better striker, and he'll have the range. He has the experience and the precision, and more importantly, the defense. He is very hard to hit. But if he ends up on his back, Chad Mendes could steal some rounds, and he would not be the first person to do it. People often take rounds off of Jose Aldo, especially towards the end of a fight when he really runs out of gas. That has been the theme with him. He's lost rounds at the ends of almost all of his fights that went to a decision. And Mendes is actually well suited to take advantage of that.
Yeah, we saw that. What would you think? I was thinking of Aldo, and people often think, oh, this is a bad matchup for him. Frankie Edgar, this is the guy that's actually going to get him. But ultimately, really, I was thinking, I'm looking at this, it's probably Mark Hominick, right? I mean, Aldo spent a lot of time on his back. Aldo said that he had the flu that night. But one thing that I agree with you, what you said here, I think you can make an argument that Chad Mendes has improved. He's a better fighter right now. And I know it sounds cliched that we say this, try to hype fights, but he really is. The first time he fought, you're right. I mean, he went in there, he was trying to take him down. Aldo knew this guy's going to try to take me down, and that's all he's going to do, and that's how he's going to try to beat me. With three knockouts in his last 4 fights, finishing a guy like Clay Guida, that's not easy to finish. Aldo's going to have to be aware of this right now. It's a totally different dynamic this time around. I totally get that.
Yeah, and Chad Mendes, I mean, he didn't do much damage in their first fight. He was just telegraphing those takedowns. He was coming after him.
Yeah, it was like a bull and a matador. You're right, the first fight.
Yeah. But I guess relying on the wrestling too much, it just creates a one-dimensional situation. Chad Mendes only landed 1 head strike in that entire first round, basically because he was chasing. He did actually throw a lot of leg kicks before the takedown attempts, but for Jose Aldo to basically be able to move backwards and counter strike and just wait for that opening, defend the takedown, and wait to throw a knee up the middle, that was a really good situation for Jose Aldo. It will not repeat itself. That's the thing about the change in Team Alpha Male. Their striking has improved. Their reliance on the takedown has dropped. They simply don't need it as much. And that's a big strategic difference because you don't have to telegraph that. Now, when you fake the takedown, you're really going for striking and vice versa. So I think that will have an effect here. I mean, I'm expecting a pretty close fight.
Reed Kuhn with us. Reed, we only have a couple of minutes left here. And as I mentioned, we're giving away these books. We got a couple of more to give away. So the first ones to fire off the tweet and say, hey, we want that book when you're watching this show. I'm going to be watching my Twitter at about 11 Eastern time on Wednesday night. And we'll fire off another book. Before we let you go, Reed, you got a column coming out with ESPN talking about cage sizes. And evidently it doesn't matter what we're talking about. Size does matter.
Yeah, size matters, especially when you're changing one of the most fundamental aspects of the sport, like the size of the playing field. So in the book, we looked at WEC finish rates, World Extreme Cage Fighting. we looked at those weight classes that were merged into the UFC. So it was basically the same fighters and the same matchmakers, just in a different size cage, because the WEC cage was much smaller. And whereas the WEC was kind of famous for being exciting and fast-paced, lots of finishes, those same fighters, their finish rate dropped when they moved into the UFC. So the question has always lingered whether or not that was a real effect. Was it, a change in competition? Was it something else about being in the UFC that maybe competitive forces, it was more competitive in the UFC? Well, we finally have a little bit more data. We have over a year of data of the UFC using a small cage intermittently throughout time for smaller venue events. And so I was finally able to isolate that and examine the finish rate and see if it is a real effect. And the evidence certainly suggests that being in a smaller cage increases the finish rate. So this will be a two-part series over at ESPN. I'll be doing first looking at the finish rates by weight classes and seeing what the averages are and how that all shakes out compared to a 5-year historical. And then also looking at actual in-fight statistics. What is actually happening during a fight that is different in a small cage versus a large cage? And the fighters themselves know that it has an effect. We're starting to hear about it before an event. Oh, they're going to be using the small cage. And we're hearing about it after a fight. Matt Mitrione was even asked about it in his fight. It's very rare to see heavyweights in a small cage, but it happened. This is a really interesting idea. Most people don't realize that the UFC is using two cages, and it is an important factor. It does change outcomes. So this is something that's really cool to look at and also consider the what-ifs.
I understand that some venues, and we got to wrap it up here, Reed, but I understand that some venues, there's space issues, but I really don't understand how there's just not a uniform cage size if you're the UFC, that you would have two different playing fields, basically, two different types of surfaces, so to speak. But it's very, very interesting. I look forward to reading it on ESPN.com. And of course, there's a ton of information like that in this book. Fightnomics is the book. Check it out, fightnomics.com. Reed, it's always a pleasure, my man. Thanks for the time.
Hey, thank you. Have a good one.
There's Reed Kuhn with us. Very, very interesting as far as the cage size is concerned, but it just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, I get it. Before in the WEC, you had smaller cages, but it doesn't make sense. Have a uniform cage size right now in the UFC. But as I said, it doesn't make sense to me. They didn't have any cards for 3.5 weeks. But it does make sense that Joey Oddessa will join us next because we're going to talk some Bellator and a hell of a lot more. MMA Meltdown on the Fight Network continues.